right, let's go through a few of these, and then we'll return back to the slides in just a minute. All right. Okay, here we go. Can there be a solution for malaria, such as a killer disease, of malaria? Is there a solution possible for that?
Yeah, well, there should indeed be. There's been work on different vaccines against malaria. There's been some work to try and genetically change the mosquitoes so that they won't be able to carry the malaria parasite. And I'm not sure I could pretend completely to understand I think that it involves the introduction of some genetically modified mosquitoes and then having that sort of take over in the natural mosquito population. So, it's, I think that it is indeed possible. It's going to take a lot of work on all counts to do it, but yes, in theory, this should be able to be undertaken. It should be able to be accomplished.
Who actually manufactures the vaccine, and what's the cost?
Yeah. Okay. I was afraid that somebody was going to ask that question because I always forget. Sanofi Pasteur, GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. There's the Serum Institute of India. I'm going to forget a couple.
So there's multiple.
There are multiple
manufacturing all over the world.
Parts of the world, anyway.
Parts of the world. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the approximate cost per vaccine?
Yeah. The oral vaccine is on the order of 15 cents a dose, I think. The injected vaccine had been around $3 a dose, which is a significant disincentive. Mm-hmm. But that price has come down. I think Serum Institute of India is now providing it, and then maybe this is now across the board at around $1 a dose. So it is coming down.
Got it. Okay. Can you get both the shot as well as the oral vaccine? Can you get both?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are there any issues with the pharmaceutical companies producing the vaccine that's not as lucrative since the incidence is down?
Yeah, I think there's significant disincentive to plunge into something, and that's why I think that these possible new vaccine approaches are not so likely to take place because people are not going to want to put in the resources to develop a vaccine that then is going to have to go through huge amounts of very expensive testing when the likelihood is that when the reality is we're so close. So that's why it's we're sort of in this a bit of an interesting situation where we're just going to have to do the best we can with the resources, that we have. Sorry, because it's just there's a disincentive to try and put new investments into something that
sure.
The market's just going to disappear.
Sure. I read that either Dr. Salk or Dr. Sabin was paralyzed later in life. Is this true, and which person was affected? Yeah,
I think that Dr. Sabin did end up having, if I'm right, it was Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is a paralytic condition. So that was a very devastating situation for him.
Well, yeah. How is refrigeration maintained for the inactive injectable vaccine in countries with no standardized refrigeration?
Yeah. Okay. Good question, and I'm a little bit out of practice on that one. I think the live vaccine needs much more stringent refrigeration conditions, but the injected vaccine does need refrigeration and storage. I just don't know all of the details, but I think that what we're looking at with those patches, it may be that those would be temperature stable at ambient temperatures. So if that's the case, that would be a significant step forward.
Yeah, really, that would be great. Did you say a timeline for when you think that might be commercialized, the patches?
I don't really know. I think they're in testing now.
Okay, great. Well, no more shots for my grandkids. You're right, they cry. If eventually all mothers of children build up immunity after administering vaccines, does this mean that the immunization efforts will no longer be necessary?
No. The mothers the immunity that the mother has, which is transmitted to infants through the placenta and through nursing, only lasts for a number of months.
Okay.
So if you want somebody to be protected beyond those first few months of life, they've got to receive the vaccine.
Oh, got it. Amazing, amazing. Is it true that your father used family members to first test the vaccine? You want to do what?
Yeah, no.
Good, okay.
No, the first tests were done in the kids at the Watson home, and if I'm right, those first injections were in June of 1952, and I believe that the first injections that we got as kids in the family were in May of 1953. I think that my father wanted to indeed demonstrate his confidence in the vaccine by vaccinating his own family, but in addition to that, and I think actually more than in addition, I think his primary motive, he just wanted us protected.
Yeah. What was the Watson home?
Watson Home for Crippled Children. That
Okay.
was, so kids who'd had polio went there for rehabilitation.
Got it. Okay. Wow. Could the vaccine be used successfully with other diseases like Ebola?
Not this particular vaccine, but
The same methodologies?
same methodologies could, but again, there's been so many different advances in vaccine technology, and like the flu vaccine, which initially was inactivated using a whole virus that was chemically killed. Now the same principle is used, a non-infectious flu vaccine, but it's using just the purified outer components of the virus, so you don't have to kill it. You just use the purified materials. So with Ebola, I don't remember what the current vaccine approaches are. Whether it's based on some purified components. I don't think it's based on a live virus vaccine.
Is the virus naturally occurring in the environment, in our world, or how does it survive and how does it propagate?
People. No, it only is naturally transmitted from one person to another. So that's the reason that it's possible to aim at eradication. If it were influenza, you couldn't do it. The flu virus exists in people, in pigs, in waterfowl, and so you just can't get rid of that virus.
So the question says, without a human victim, would the wild virus actually disappear?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Well, what that means is if you didn't have any human beings on Earth,
right.
the wild virus would disappear. Hopefully,
just won't take it to Mars.
Hopefully, we can get it to disappear through a different method.
Yes. Okay. Good. What type of polio was contracted by adults in the 1930s in Los Angeles? I was told it was a polio epidemic at that time.
In what year?
In L.A. in 1930s.
1930s. It would have been, well, again, there are only three types: types 1, type 2, and type 3. And I don't know whether the outbreaks were only of one type or another. That's a good question. Whether they were mixtures of different types.
Yeah. Okay. How susceptible are nations to outbreaks from other countries that experience an outbreak of viruses like polio or other similar viruses as well? How susceptible are nations to outbreaks from other countries?
It depends on the immunization levels. As long as we keep our immunization levels up, and I'm just being specific in terms of polio itself, but the same thing is true with measles or mumps or what have you. If we keep a high enough level of immunization, we're going to have a herd effect that will keep, if a virus were introduced from somewhere else, might cause a case, but then it's not going to spread because you have a sufficient level of immunity in the population. But if we let our guard down and we get complacent and think, we don't have these diseases around, we don't want, why should I subject my child to receiving vaccines? And that's been happening. The immunization levels have dropped, and we're seeing measles outbreaks occur. We're seeing whooping cough come back and killing kids. This is something we've got to keep in our awareness. And I think that this story about polio is a really important and valuable one to help us remember. And that film itself about the shot felt round the world, and there's a Smithsonian Channel's version called A Shot to Save the World. It's valuable for people to see that, who like many of us in this room who we've gone through it, we remember. But for the present generation of parents, they don't know. So that's why I've been working with a group of people on a vaccination and immunity curriculum for use in high schools. Because one of the problems has been that there's been fears about vaccines and vaccines causing autism and so on, and many of these are completely unfounded. But once someone has gotten in their mind that vaccines are dangerous, it's really hard to change people's minds. And there have been actual studies done taking people who are against a vaccine like influenza, presenting them with facts. All that does is make matters worse. It hardens their resistance.
Really? Don't bother me with the facts.
Exactly, and okay, so I'm going to take an even firmer stand. So that's why I think moving back earlier and exposing kids when they're in school to these ideas, letting them think for themselves, being exposed to different sides of the controversy and so on, that they should be in a position, and doing things like seeing this film, they'll be in a better position to make decisions for themselves when they become parents.
Kind of leads to this next question, then I'm going to ask you to go back and finish some of your presentation there, and then we'll come back for some final questions. Please comment on the anti-vaccine groups, people in current time, kind of what you were saying there. I mean, in other words, how safe are vaccine programs really today?
Yeah, very safe. There are the vaccines where the studies have been done. Measles, mumps, rubella, that was supposed to be associated with autism, is just not the case. There's not a real association there. The first fears had to do in recent times had to do with the pertussis vaccine, which back in the 80s was based on not very purified material that was very so-called reactogenic. It could cause high fevers and so on. There was a consideration. I know we had to go through that thinking process ourselves as parents. Do we want to expose our child to the risk of some discomfort when there wasn't any whooping cough around at that point? Then we made the decision, no, if everybody decided not to get vaccinated so that they could avoid the risk of some side effects, uncomfortable side effects, that's not a socially, that's not supportive of society's needs. So there were some fears that kids who had gotten the pertussis vaccine were experiencing developmental delays, seizures, and so on. That was the beginning of the anti-vaccine movement in recent times. And I can understand, of course, if you're a parent and your kid gets a vaccine and then there's some untoward effect that something that you're noticing in your child that's been significant and problematic, naturally you make that association. But when the studies were done, that there was not an association, and those cases were determined in the situations that have been looked at to be caused by something called Dravet's syndrome, which is a genetic defect. Okay. So again and again, these problems have been looked at, and it turns out that there's not been substance to them. New vaccines come along, new fears arise. Everything needs to be looked at carefully, and just look at polio. Yes, vaccines can cause problems, but you need to be really specific about it, okay? If it's a problem in the Cutter incident in manufacturing, you got to deal with that. If you have the live polio vaccine, you have to make the appropriate decisions, and the decision is made, we stop using it in this country. So people are being careful. All of these vaccines are being looked at carefully, and the main bottom line from my vantage point is that we're in a position now where we have vaccines that exist, that are being administered safely, and we need to continue to take advantage of those vaccines. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, got it. Great. Want to talk a little bit about the future?
Well, I'd be happy to. I don't want to put
How are we doing, team? Okay, keep going. All right.
Okay.
All right. So share with us what the future looks like, a little bit about the Legacy Foundation, if you got time, and we'll come back and finish up a few more questions. Okay. Thank you.
So this is just shifting gears a little bit. I'll try and be quick about it. After the vaccine work, my father turned his attention to some other things. He established the Salk Institute for Biological, it wasn't going to be the name that he chose, but it had to be that way, the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in San Diego, in La Jolla, California, which is doing primarily fundamental biological research. But at the same time, he continued research in his own labs on multiple sclerosis, on cancer, eventually not in his lab, he had closed it by that time, but at the end of his life, he was preoccupied with work on an AIDS vaccine. But all along the way, he continued to be concerned about the human condition. He wrote 4 books. One was called Man Unfolding. The second was The Survival of the Wisest. Third, with my brother Jonathan, World Population and Human Values. And last, Anatomy of Reality, Merging of Intuition and Reason. He was always thinking about the interactions among people and what steps we need to take if we are going to not only survive but thrive on this planet. This graph is a thinking tool as far as my father was concerned. It's called an S-shaped curve or a sigmoid curve, and it's the kind of curve that you see if you take a couple of fruit flies and you put them in a box and you feed them. They reproduce, the population begins to grow exponentially, and then in that situation with the space limitations, the fruit fly's reproduction rate drops and the curve plateaus, and that's the kind of curve that you see. You can see it in many different natural biological situations. And my father extrapolated from that to the human situation, because a number of decades ago, that's exactly what was going on in our own lives. The population was increasing exponentially over the last couple of 100 years, and we were at a point where we had to face where are we going from here? You can't keep growing exponentially. We only have so much room on this planet. We don't want to face a catastrophe where the population crashes. This is the kind of outcome that we want to see, and this is beginning to take place. The population curve has bent over, and my father's point is that we're in a new reality now. That in this so-called Epic A, is the way he saw it. Everything was based on growth, and the kinds of attitudes and values that we carried within us were geared towards that competition, win-lose attitudes, as opposed to what we need to, and very self-oriented, our own selves, our own countries, where we are now. If we're going to succeed, we're going to have to work together. We're going to have to live together. We're going to have to respect each other. And the emphasis will need to be on cooperation rather than competition, on win-win attitudes, and on mutualism as opposed to a selfish attitude. So that's where we are now. But how are we going to do this? How are we going to cultivate the kind of values that will support life in this next phase of our experience? And I just want to touch on that a little bit. I think that what we see when we look around us is that people's perspectives can be broader or they can be narrower. And if our own individual consciousness is limited in a way, and we have the blinders on to the rest of the world around us, what we end up with is the lines on the left are sort of individual tendencies or needs or desires or actions, all get jumbled up in this sort of conflicts. And that's what we see so often in the world, that we just are behaving in ways within our own societies and between one country and another country where things don't align. And the conflicts, that comes from the Latin confligo, to throw together. Whereas if we have more alignment and more clarity in our own subjective experience, and can appreciate the world around us from a deeper level, then these individual tendencies, rather than being all thrown together and jumbled up, can come into alignment or conflux, a flowing together. So a question is, how can we go about encouraging and facilitating a development of clarity and breadth within us as we relate to each other? So I just want to throw out a little bit of an indication as to where we might be able to look in helping in this process. This is a photograph of an experiment that took place in 1983, 1984, where almost 8,000 people were brought together, and this was in Fairfield, Iowa, practicing a particular set of meditation techniques, where there had been a lot of research done on the effects on individuals, and suggestions, indeed, that there was an effect not only on the people themselves that were practicing these techniques, but on the broader society. Reductions in crime, reductions in accident rates, that something was taking place that was an influence of positivity that was spreading into the environment. So this gathering was put together with, see, we're seeing it? Yeah. With the intention that this number of people practicing in one place at one time could have an influence globally. I actually took part in that. I won't have a pointer to be able to point to where I am in that picture. But so this is based on some personal experience. And this was another such gathering in Washington, D.C. This was 4,000 people that were brought together with the intention of determining whether or not there would be an effect on the crime rate in Washington, and I won't go into the data. There was an effect that was seen, and some apparent facilitation of the gridlock that was taking place in government back at that point. So I'm just going to show you some data, and then I'll just say a few things about what may be going on that underlies this. This is a war peace index that was created and looked at during the civil war in Lebanon that was going on in 1983, 1984, 1985. In the upward direction is progress towards peace, less conflict. And in the lower direction, more intensity of the war that was going on. And what you see is where it says Iowa Assembly. That's that first picture that I had showed. And it's particularly in the second half of that assembly. This was right after Christmas. There were more people, and it looks as though there was an effect that could be seen in a reduction in the violence that was taking place. Second was an assembly of people in Lebanon itself, a smaller group, but right on site, and very clearly it looks as though something was taking place in terms of progress towards peace. A few months later, an assembly in Yugoslavia, and again, an effect that to my eye was there. And this will be the final data graph. This is from the period June of 1983 to August of 1985. And it's looking at 7 different assemblies, one in Israel, one in Iowa, another in Lebanon, Yugoslavia, and then three more that were looked at in Fairfield in the Netherlands and Washington, D.C. On the left, let's look at the reduced conflict side. That the bar on the left is the so-called non-experimental period, and that was about 90% of the time during that 1983 to 1985 period. And it's looking at a conflict scale, so that's the baseline. For the 7 assemblies that took place, which were it was actually about 11% of that time period, in every case, there was a reduction in the level of conflict that was observed. And it was around a 48% reduction, and the p-value is a statistical significance, highly statistically significant finding. On the right is about as hard a statistic as you can get, which is war fatalities. Again, the bar on the left is the 90% of the time when nothing was taking place, and that's the baseline. I guess that's the number of fatalities per day was around 12 per day, and then during those 7 assemblies, a significant reduction, a 71% reduction in war fatalities overall, again, highly statistically significant. So what's going on here? Is this completely ridiculous and non-existent and just by chance? The by chance part seems not to be an explanation because of the statistical significance using the sophisticated time series analysis that were done to analyze the data. The hypothesis that's been put forth is that what's going on here is that at a very deep level in nature, there is an underlying field. I won't go through all the mechanics of that. I can if we want to talk about it further. There's a unity at the basis of nature, that where all of the different physical fields are unified, electromagnetic, gravitation, etc. And also, that's where, and I'm talking about this from a scientific point of view. That's my own leaning, my own upbringing, my own orientation. One could think of it from any of a number of different angles, but that our own subjective experience, where does that come from? Where is it? How come we're conscious? And the proposal is that underlying field of unity at the basis of existence not only underlies all of physical manifestation, but also is that's where it's at in terms of our consciousness. And we think of ourselves as isolated individuals. I'm me and I'm aware, and you and you're aware. But the proposal is that really at the base we're all united. This is that our own subjective experience is shared. This is something that's universal. And what's happening here is that when people are practicing these meditation techniques, not only are they gaining the benefit for themselves of a very deep, quiet inner experience of the fundamental level of nature that has benefits in terms of bringing that back out in one's own life and one's own experience, but there's a reciprocal effect. I think that was talked about maybe this morning in the talk that Greg gave about a ripple effect, that when individuals, and then especially in these large groups, have the mind quiets down and experiences that deep level, there's an effect that spreads. And it spreads not only in the individual or in the people in the immediate surroundings, but if there is a large enough group, it can spread globally. So I'm just wanting to bring this out. We don't tend to think about these things. There's so many diplomatic effort. I mean, one of your well, I guess the peace thing may have gone away.
Moving over here for you.
Okay, great. Okay, it's what you do too. There's so many efforts being made to create peace in the world. I'm just putting this out as an idea that I think deserves some attention. Making sure that these experiments that have been done are solid, that this is something that people can evaluate, and if it turns out that this is something that's substantial, I think that it's something one might want to consider looking into on a practical basis. So I just leave you with this notion that there's something intriguing out there that's going on, and it may conceivably be worthwhile to be thinking about to include as part of the overall efforts to improve harmony in the world. So the last two slides, this was a talk that my father gave in 1977 when he received the Jawaharlal Nehru Award for International Understanding. The title of that talk was a question, which is, are we being good ancestors? So that's something that are we being good ancestors? So not only are we being good citizens in the world today, but what are we doing that's good for the future? And I think that this is what you all are living in your own lives, is contributing to the society around you, but this is something that's leaving a gift and a legacy for the future. And finally, from that same acceptance speech, after my father died in 1995, another quote from that speech was engraved in the travertine in the courtyard at the entryway to the Salk Institute, and that is, "Hope lies in dreams, in imagination, and in the courage of those who dare to make dreams into reality." And that's something that, again, that this is what characterizes your life. So thanks so much. I'm really happy to have been part of this experience.
Just a couple more here that are really great questions I wanted to pull out of here. We kind of lose perspective of time. How many days and weeks did it really take your father from when he started his work until this all was announced, et cetera?
It was very quick. I mean,
really?
The work on the typing program began in 1948. The March of Dimes came, the director of research of the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis asked my father to take part in a multi-center program, but as things went on, it became clear that they had a technique in their hands that a vaccine could be made from, and so the work turned towards the vaccines, that may have been 1950-ish.
Okay.
50 to 55. This was a quick process.
Got 3 Rotary questions and we're out of here, okay? You do that? Here we go. When do you think we will actually eradicate polio?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean, everyone is hoping and thinking, we're almost there. And so last year, 37 cases. Excuse me. Last year at this time, there were 12 cases of polio in May. Up by maybe it was the end of April. No, we're enough in May. So 12 cases of polio last year up till this point. This year, 5. Or maybe it was 13 and 5. So another year in which there's improvement. And the number of cases caused by the circulating virus was 3 at this time last year and 0 so far this year. So again, another year of progress. We're inching our way there. It's very close and it's moving in the right direction. I would be surprised personally if this year did it. It's really hard to make a prediction. So much effort is going into this. It's moving in the right direction, but I don't think I'd want to hazard a number.
So one of the questions within Rotary internally to our organization is when, not if, but when this eradication actually occurs. Where would you like to see us put the huge amount of effort that we put into the world? You'd like to see us go to that.
That's look, you're doing you're doing so much. All of these areas that you're supporting, it's just these causes are really important, and everyone has something that's close to their own hearts. And for me, that's where it is. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. How can Rotary help support in whatever way your Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation?
Well, that is a good question. What I'm hoping is going to take place is I mentioned something about the donation of some of these historical materials to the University of Pittsburgh. I'm hoping that we may end up in a partnership with some kind of a Jonas Salk Legacy Center at the university that would be a partnership between the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation, which at this point is still quite small, and the university. That this would be a strong partnership to be able to carry this legacy forward.
You mean the University of Pittsburgh?
Yeah, that's in my mind.
In Pennsylvania, by the way, just up the road a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see what we can do about it.
So this is a desire. It's being talked about. It's being considered, and I just think that Rotary and the Jonas Salk Legacy Foundation would make natural partners. So I would absolutely look forward to interacting with you all and talking about ways in which we can be working together.
Great. Last question is, how can Rotary provide service to you personally in your world?
Tell me what you're thinking.
How can we service you? Well, our organization is noted for service above self, and you've done such marvelous work in carrying on your father's legacy, but also the marvelous things you're doing. How can we help you achieve your dreams?
Well, you know, Dave, I'd love to continue to talk with you about that. I think there's already been a constructive interaction between us, and rather than my giving you a prescription of here's what I think, let's be creative. Let's think about this together, because again, I just have so much enjoyed the interactions with all of you and with people in Rotary over the years. Your hearts are just so in such, they're in the right place, and not only your hearts but your bodies. I mean, you are out there doing things. So let's talk.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Good.